Wars have been fought over land, power, and revenge, but have you ever heard of a war started over a pastry shop? Grab a snack, because today we dive into one of the strangest and most bizarre conflicts in history, the Pastry War of 1838. No, this isn't a joke, this is an actual war. A war sparked by a ruined bakery? And yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds, but before you go grabbing a croissant, let's get into the sweet details of this tale. Our story begins in Mexico, a country freshly liberated from Spanish rule. After Mexico gained its independence in 1821, things didn't go exactly smoothly. The new country was plagued by political instability, corruption, economic struggles, and ongoing battles for power. Imagine a young nation trying to run itself while dealing with constant revolutions, rebellions, and foreign threats. It wasn't a pretty picture. But while Mexico was trying to get its act together, Europe wasn't about to sit back and let new power rise up in the Americas. Enter France, a European powerhouse looking for any reason to flex its muscles. And that's where Monsieur Remontel comes in. Yes, the pastry chef. You might think, a pastry chef? What role could he possibly play in the international diplomacy? Well, stick with me because this is where things get very flaky. Remontel was a Frenchman who owned a small but very successful bakery in Mexico City. His pastries, especially his French-style treats, were beloved by locals and foreigners alike. He was just living the dream, baking croissants and tarts. But then, one fateful day in 1838, his dream turned into a nightmare. A group of Mexican officers, apparently fueled by tequila and bad decisions, stumbled into Remontel's bakery. These officers, known for their wild behavior, didn't just visit the bakery, they completely trashed the place. They broke windows, destroyed furniture, and, to make the matters worse, they helped themselves to Remontel's pastries. And of course, they didn't pay for any of it. Instead, they left the bakery in ruins and scattered crumbs everywhere. Remontel was left to pick up the pieces of his business and his broken dreams. Understandably, Remontel was livid. He did what any business owner would do. He demanded compensation from the Mexican government for the damages. But, well, things weren't exactly going well for Mexico at the time. The government, already struggling with massive debts, political chaos, and unstable economy, just ignored him. So what's a baker to do when his life's work is destroyed and no one will help him? That's right, go straight to the King of France. Remontel wasn't one to back down. Instead of quietly accepting his defeat, he went straight to the top. He appealed directly to King Louis Philippe of France, describing the destruction of his bakery and demanding compensation. And to be fair, Remontel wasn't the only French citizen in Mexico who had grievances. France had business interests in Mexico, and French nationals in Mexico had long been waiting to get paid for debts owed to them by the Mexican government. So what did France do? Well, France saw the opportunity to flex its military might. In fact, the French government issued a formal demand to Mexico to pay 600,000 pesos in damages. Not just for the bakery, but also to settle the outstanding debts owed to the French citizens. That was a massive sum at the time, far more than the cost of a bakery or pastries. But Mexico, already in financial ruin, was in no position to pay. The French were basically saying, well, you didn't pay for pastries, so now we're going to bankrupt you even further. When Mexico refused to pay, France didn't just sit back. In 1838, France decided to take direct action. French warships surrounded Mexican ports, effectively cutting off trade. The French were serious. They weren't just sending a message, they were causing real harm. The French blockade began when Veracruz, the most important port in Mexico, being bombarded by French naval cannons. The French meant business. This wasn't just a minor attack. They were hitting Mexico where it hurt the most, economically. Mexico, already struggling with its finances, was now facing a full-scale blockade. With trade disrupted, all prices skyrocketed, supplies began to dwindle, and the people of Mexico were already weary from the political instability. They were getting desperate. This wasn't just a war over pastries anymore, it was a war for survival, and it was only going to get worse. The effects of the blockade were catastrophic. With ports shut down, businesses across Mexico were forced to close. Prices for everyday goods soared, and people were left starving and frustrated. The government, already on shaky ground, struggled to find a solution. People took to the streets to protest, and political unrest grew. Mexico, still reeling from its war for independence, now had to face an international crisis, one that ironically stemmed from a single pastry shop. And yet, despite all this suffering, the government didn't seem to have a clear plan. The people were angry, they wanted action, and that's when the one person who could turn things around, at least in his own mind, stepped forward. Enter Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He was a controversial figure in the Mexican history, having lost Texas to the United States just a few years prior. But here was his chance to redeem himself. Santa Anna saw the French invasion as an opportunity to prove himself as the heroic defender of Mexico's sovereignty. So Santa Anna rallied his troops and began preparations to fight back. But things weren't as easy as he hoped. During the fighting, Santa Anna took a direct hit. A cannonball struck his leg, shattering it completely. But Santa Anna wasn't going to let a little thing like losing his leg stop him. No, he amputated, and then did something, well, a little extra. Santa Anna didn't just keep his injury to himself, he held an actual funeral for his amputated leg, complete with a procession and honors. You can't make this stuff up. He even had an empty coffin for the leg, and a crowd gathered to mourn the loss of his limb like it was a fallen soldier. Talk about going above and beyond for drama. But despite all the theatrics, the French weren't backing down. They continued to press their advantage, and it seemed like Mexico was losing the fight. Eventually, other countries, particularly Britain, took notice of the situation. They had their own trade interests in Mexico and didn't want things to escalate further. With tensions reaching their peak, Britain stepped in as a mediator. Finally, after months of fighting, Mexico had no choice but to agree to the French terms. Mexico agreed to pay the 600,000 pesos, and in early 1839, the French forces withdrew. But here's the thing, Mexico may have lost the war, but the real winner in all of this was Monsieur Remontel, the pastry chef who started the whole mess. He probably got his money and returned to baking, while Mexico was left to pick up the pieces of its fractured economy. But what happened after the war? Well, Mexico's political instability didn't just disappear because the French withdrew. Mexico still had a mountain of debt, political corruption, and economic struggles to deal with. Santa Anna, the self-proclaimed hero of the war, used his newfound fame to return to power, multiple times. He would go on to become one of Mexico's most infamous leaders, but not exactly a stable one. As for Remontel, the man who caused this chaos, he might have been the only real winner in this bizarre conflict. The French got their payment, but what did they gain? A war over a pastry shop? Hardly worth the cost. So what did we learn today? Never underestimate the power of a disgruntled baker. Sometimes the strangest wars can start over the most unexpected things, like pastries. And if you ever find yourself losing a war, just make sure you have a big dramatic gesture, like a funeral for your leg.